AT&T is one of the top companies helping the NSA collect the private data of U.S. citizens. Now, not once during the Republican debates last week did the issue of domestic spying come up, but the problem does seem to be getting worse on the national level. Joining me now to talk about AT&T's role in domestic surveillance is Michael Burg. Michael, I don't think that there's anybody who's watching this program right now that doesn't fully understand, the scope and the depth of the NSA's domestic spying policies. What they may not know really is how complicit and cooperative a lot of these telecom giants have been. I know AT&T stands out as possibly one of the biggest accomplices to the U.S. government. Tell us a little bit about the role that AT&T has played in turning over data.
They've been turning over data long before it was known by the public. AT&T has been, they refer to as a partnership with the government in terms of turning over all the data they have to the government in a very secretive way that we'll never know. But I think of all the telecoms, AT&T has been the number one partner to the U.S. government in terms of its spying on its own citizens.
Well, I think it's interesting, too, because this has actually gone back long before we had the 9/11 attacks.
Right.
This was before anybody even knew what Al-Qaeda was or ISIS or anything. Islamic fundamentalism wasn't something we talked about. But AT&T, as far back as we see in the 1980s, I believe it was, they were turning over phone records to the government as part of this big program right after the big monopolies were kind of broken up a bit. So how deep, how far back does this thing actually go? I mean,
well, I think you're right. As far as we know, it goes back to the 80s. It may go even farther back than that. And what's interesting about it is, right now the government and listen, the United States is the greatest country in the world. I want to make sure everybody understands that. And we do have a security issue here. But if you look all the way back into the 1980s, before, as you mentioned, before Al-Qaeda, before any terrorist attacks, AT&T was giving them phone records, information about our U.S. citizen. I always go back to 1984, George Orwell's Big Brother book. And I remember when I read that back in the 60s, I thought, this could never happen in America. This is not going to be an America that we're going to be living in. But not only have we reached what Orwell described in 1984, but we've gone way beyond that. Yes, we need to have security. Yes, we need to make sure that we're safe here on U.S. soils and abroad. But this unlimited, warrantless, without subpoenas, without court orders, going out and getting U.S. citizens' data, information, their emails, their phone records, their telephone calls, is just beyond anything that we should tolerate in America. There has to be a balance.
Well, what's interesting is that every time that this program or any piece of this program, this domestic spying, has come before a judge, it is, I believe almost 100% of the time, has been categorically found to be unconstitutional. There was just a ruling a few months back. I believe a judge up in New York ruled again, program unconstitutional, cannot do it. Still happening. That's what's kind of crazy is so what does that mean? I mean, when it gets ruled unconstitutional by a federal judge and the program still continues, I don't even know how that's still possible. I mean,
well, it's possible because we have the NSA and the U.S. government not following the rule of law. To me, it's a simple. It's no different than the clerk in Kentucky who refused to follow the Supreme Court and issuing marriage licenses to people who are gay. And she refused to do it because she said, I don't have to follow the law. And when you have a presidential candidate like Huckabee get up there and say, oh yeah, I don't have to follow the Constitution, and he runs for president, but that's no different than what we're seeing here with the NSA. The NSA and the government basically is thumbing their noses at the court system, who has the power invested by the Constitution to put a stop to it. And when you see that it's gone beyond what is allowed under law, that's when we, the people, have to step up and say, no, yes, we want security. Yes, we do need some limited investigation, but we can't keep spying on all our people, giving them billions of data on the hundreds of millions of people that live here in this country.
But, when the government does want to spy on some, I don't want to say spy. When they do need to get phone records or emails or any other kind of data, they can go to the FISA court, get a subpoena, get a warrant, and do this legally. There's no reason for this mass collection of data when we already have a system in place, been in place for a very long time, that allows them to do this. And when they do it that way, that is constitutional, that is allowed, that is the rule of law, and it's how law enforcement officers can help stop this. Now, we've only got about a minute left here, but I wanted to ask you, in the Republican debates we've seen so far, not a single mention of domestic surveillance. Admittedly, I did have to take my dog out for about 5 minutes, so I may have missed it if it came up, but Democratic debates, I assume eventually we're going to have one. Do you think this issue will come up during a Democratic debate?
I sure hope so. Unfortunately, Senator Udall of Colorado, who led the charge to try to do something to change the system, was defeated in the last election. But there are other people who are looking at this, and the Democrats have to bring this up to the public. It's an important issue. The question is, what kind of America are my children going to have, and hopefully my grandchildren have, that's going to be safe, but yes, secure, and we're not going to have Big Brother spying on us every day and collecting data. And we don't know what they're going to use it for. That's the other thing. We also know that this data can be used for many purposes, and not only for security purposes. And so it's a real slippery slope.
Michael Burg, thank you very much for talking with us today. This is a great story, and we'll check back in with you next week.
Thank you, Farron. Appreciate it.